This is the Crucible, the JRTC experience.
Current combat power is 87%.
All pack on site.
Here we have
All pack complete.
This is Beans, Bullets, Band-Aids, Batteries, Water, and Fuel. In this series, we discuss logistic warfighting skills and lessons learned in a decisive action training environment for large-scale combat operations at JRTC.
Hi, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Drew Zabriskie, the Leader Training Program Senior here at the Joint Readiness Training Center in Fort Johnson, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Crucible, the JRTC experience. Today, I'm honored to have two phenomenal sustainers and leaders here with us. We have Performance 6, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Belzer, the commander of 526 LSB, and we'll talk a little bit about what an LSB is here in a little bit. And then we have our very own Lieutenant Colonel Bruce Roett, Lima 6, the Task Force Sustainment Senior, who wrapped up command of 82nd BSB from 3rd Brigade 82nd a little while ago. So gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Awesome.
Very
Hey,
excited.
gentlemen, if I could, just a little bit of background on your military history, sort of about your personal lives.
Yeah, sure. This is number 6, my 6th CTC. One with 10th Mountain at NTC, and then 5 here. 2 of those with 10th Mountain, the other 3 at 101st. Mix of positions. So been away for a minute, right? And certainly first one in LISCO, first one in MBCT ever. So I think this is a significantly different flavor. I was in 210 Mountain for a handful of years. Then I commanded a company in the 101st. Went out to do some KD time at JBLM, Pentagon tour, Operation Warp Speed. XO the Deputy G4 of the Army, and then down here, and that's it in a nutshell.
Awesome.
So I'm Lieutenant Colonel Bruce Roett, as Drew mentioned, Ohio State ROTC product, and been a light fighter my whole career. So don't even know what a tank looks like, and don't care to, frankly. So grew up in the 101st and 4th Brigade Currahee, so almost 6 years there, as well as a year in division staff in the G4. I did my broadening time at West Point as a TAC, and then came to Fort Liberty for the first time and spent 3 years in the 82nd, and then went to the other side of the fence in the SMU for 3 years on that side. And as Drew mentioned, commanded 82nd BSB and the 3rd Brigade there on Fort Liberty. So again, a very light fighter background, deployments. I was a distro platoon leader in Baghdad, Iraq for a year in 2005. I was a company commander of a distribution company in a BSB in Afghanistan for 13 months in Sharana, RC East.
Oh, yeah.
I did a deployment with Falcon, 2nd Brigade, 82nd to Mosul, the Battle of Mosul, really where we finally defeated ISIS, the physical caliphate. So that was a great deployment as a SPO. And then finally, two deployments with the classified task force, under the USASOC side of the house, and then an operational deployment to meet up with my battalion that had deployed under OEADR in support of Poland and the defense of NATO during Russia's aggression. So a good smattering there as far as RTUs. I've been here at JRTC 7 times, and this is my 2nd rotation, just wrapping up a 2nd rotation as Lima 6 here. So this is the only CTC I've been to, and wholeheartedly believe in it. I think this is, as we call it, a crucible event. It's a leadership laboratory, Ranger School for leaders, but the intent with this, and I've seen it every single time that I've been here, and the RTUs I've been, is we're trading sweat for blood, and we're making mistakes here so we don't make them in combat. I firmly believe that if Russia had a CTC of their own, they would have been able to take Kiev in 5 days if they were just able to work out some of those kinks and quirks and failures that they experienced in those first 10, 15 days with their assault and lining up log trucks on the road to Kiev. So this is really something the U.S. Army should be proud of with all their CTCs, and definitely a great opportunity for every unit that gets to come down here and train.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, you bring up an interesting point specifically about Russia there. So the CTCs are often one of the only times that a brigade and a division will be able to exercise their sustainment, really, from the platoon, company, battalion, all the way up to the DSB level, something that we don't necessarily get to practice with back at home station too often. Awesome. Perfect. Colonel Belzer, if we can, so we introduced you as the 526 LSB commander. Can you talk a little bit about what an LSB is?
So what the LSB BSB transition? I think the biggest piece of this is 526 has 7 full-time company commands and then 2 part-time, right? So as the CAV squadron FSC has already been shut down, right? We're bringing those folks in under the wing and trying to manage all that property. But that transition's already happened. The engineers have not done that yet, so we have some controls, influence, I guess you'd call it, coordinating authority with the field artillery FSC and the engineer FSC. And so it's a large. It's a large group, but it's also spread out all over the place, and it makes the prospect of managing garrison functions very complicated. And what it forced us to do in a lot of cases before leaving was pull leaders away from their units to do rehearsals.
Okay.
And the primary challenge, I think, for the LSB to this point has been breaking ourselves of old habits, and being able to weight the main effort requires that we are thinking through what individual battalions want versus what the brigade desires.
Right.
And what I have been very focused on since arriving has been providing the brigade commander the capacity to do what he wants to do at a time and place of his choosing, and not provide constraints and limitations. And we have the benefit, as Second Brigade, we have the benefit of 100% Sustainment Brigade being entirely in favor, entirely in our corner, without changing the command and support relationship that the brigade is accustomed to between the LSB and the Sustainment Brigade. And what that's done for me is given us the capacity to do things in training, right? Try things in training that might otherwise not be done, and also to reinforce the CSSB that's supporting us here with folks that we also know. And so there's some connective tissue there that's also of value. In terms of where the LSB is going, I think we're very much in a position to talk through what went well and what didn't.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think the LSB and a mobile brigade combat team is different.
Yeah.
Right. While it may work differently in a light airborne capacity, I think those are lessons already learned and others, and I think we follow them. Right. I'm totally in favor. What I have seen with the MBCT and the L2A2 long range air assault mission has been the battalions are significantly more agile than they used to be, and they outrun themselves regularly.
Okay.
Right, and that we're going to have to talk through some hard conversations about where logisticians get seats on the aircraft on that initial infill and how we're employing those folks.
Awesome. I think a lot of the challenges you ran into, Dan, if you're from the 82nd or 173rd or a GFE type of unit, is liquid logistics over an air line of communication. So what were some ways in which you tried to tackle that, and where did you experience success or failure in those endeavors? So
liquid logistics, we operate on a handful of numbers as kind of the watchword for the entire brigade, right? The first one is 7 quarts per man per day. And the second is waterways 8 1/3 pounds per gallon, right? And we talk about soldier load, and we're talking about guys carrying 17, 18 pounds of water in canteens. And the tyranny of density is that helicopters can only carry so much. We had an effort before departing, and just couldn't get it off the ground, to convert some Smithy bags into a smaller size. It was the maximum weight that we could lift in with a Chinook. Didn't get there. We did fight through every 500-gallon blivet we could find, and repurposed some others, and went through the whole testing process. 101st is core competency for blivets, right? I think that worked out okay. It's also worth pointing out, right? Like we train with 3 blivets at a time because we like that number of pounds, but we can get to 4. You can't get them all the way full, but you can get close. And our goal was the maximum amount of the commodity and the minimum weight of the conveyance. And that's why we weren't pulling in water buffaloes. It's not enough water. We want to get after what equipment I can actually get. And so I look at what we could do with the weight of all the equipment included. And our read on that is essentially 2 days supply for a battalion.
Okay.
Right. A battalion task force, whatever. So, we intended to be really picky about tracking moving averages for consumption rates. I don't think we got there.
Yeah.
But I do think that we did not have a fuel challenge.
Okay.
Broadly speaking, right?
Yep.
We had plenty of fuel assets. I think if I had to trade, I would trade fuel assets for water, right? The bigger piece of this is storage capacity and delivery capacity. And while the Hippo rack-based system is great, it's less and less usable in this kind of fight, especially in constrained left-right limits. You can't get it off the road very easily, right? We need to be minimizing the number of trailers we're using whenever we can. We discovered that we had significant training gaps in night drivers training.
Sure.
Backing up, right? Backing up in particular was just a struggle for us. And moving Hippos around, it was plainly obvious what it was to a drone.
Sure.
No hiding it, right? It's very obvious. And they're pacing items to the brigade, by far, right? So I think a couple of things I learned out of the L2A2 and how we're going to manage liquid log future tense is pure fleeting a lot of things into that HEMIT, that HEMIT chassis in the first place. And then in the second place is a significant number of lowboy trailers that we used to just hand back to the component 2 and 3 units that we could have used regularly and would be easier to hide and easier to use to back up with that shorter bobtail. So I think the lesson learned for me has been you need dedicated aircraft, and having never served in an airborne unit other than the 101st, I've never been in the 82nd or the 173rd. I was not fighting this from the perspective of equipment lands on the ground in advance of the unit arriving. I was operating under the impression of we don't know if the LZ is safe before they land, and therefore we can't land logistics before we land the infantry force. And so what that did is it put us in kind of behind the power curve on when do we get this stuff in, and once we get it in, who's going to manage it, and how are we going to get to it, and who's going to clear it off the LZ, and those sorts of questions. So it leads us, I think, very well to the conversation about company trains and skills that maneuver battalions haven't had to manage with an FSC to do it for them for a long time. No, we brought in thousands of water cans, and it's a blessing to have the capacity, but it's a curse because I don't get to shake canteens. I don't know what they're carrying. I know what we think they're carrying. I also don't get to shake water cans. I don't get to count them. I don't have a guy there who can count them for me. I got to count on other folks to count them for us. So the delay in basic loads of water is that by the time it reaches the GAC, the problem is already metastasized beyond control. So we spent a lot of time in the calculation game. Like, no, we think we're okay here. Like, everybody relax. Don't get fixated on a single point of data and a single question. Stay focused on fighting forward to what's coming next. I let us get fixed in a lot of cases on info requirements, and I would do it differently if I had to do over again. I still think that we can get logistics into the front, and if for whatever reason we have an LZ that's fouled, leave it. We'll figure something else out. I think the demand signal on Blivets is going to be significantly higher for every brigade that tries to do this. I don't have enough as it stands, and we ordered everything we could get out of the Army supply system. So where do we go from here? We're gonna go back to our fabrication capacity, and we're gonna build ourselves like a way to lift that much water without Blivets, with a single set of pipes, a single valve that travels with the device, so that nobody gets separated. And we'll see what the Army thinks about that option. It's something that I don't think has ever been done before. I've never seen anything like it before. But I think it's exciting for a handful of reasons. But the biggest one is that the math largely works, and we approach this with a lot of unknowns, and among them, like what consumption really looks like when you have vehicles to drive you around, and you're going to rest during the day and you're going to fight during the night. What does that really look like? And I'm glad we got the test here. Your team and Dan Geronimo really tested us at the end, right? Water consumption went from 2 gallons a day to 2 1/3, 2.5, and then closer to 4 by the end. So the cumulative usage is another problem we hadn't considered. But I mean, huge lesson learned all the way around.
Yeah, and probably a unique experience coming to JRTC in August, sort of hurricane season. I don't think it rained a single day on you all, about 110 to 115 degrees with the humidity for about a week straight there, so water consumption, becoming truly life or death there.
I think what was really interesting to observe and coach was your staff sort of working through the pre-positioning of liquid log and specifically water. You guys started asking the right questions as far as, is there an SFAB or partner unit that could secure us some water and cache for it? Is there a soft formation that could acquire us something and put it somewhere and tell us where it is? And then so far as the airfields you seized or the LZs near a town, you guys identified some well systems and you sent your PM out there and you tested the water. And, I think this is where we need to go is, sustainment formations is thinking outside of the box for LISCO. COIN, these are all things we never would have done, but absolutely things we're going to have to do in LISCO, and your team did a good job with that. And I was in the Alpha Company cluster, that was something they were actively trying to destroy because they knew if they bled you of your water, 110-degree heat, infantrymen are not going to be able to do much. So that was a pretty interesting OP4 tactic that I've never seen before.
And to be fair, though, right? I mean, I've been very focused with the brigade about the way you stop the mobile brigade combat team, right? It's the same. For us, it's water. For heavy formation, it's fuel. There's no hiding it.
Right.
You know where the fuel trucks are. You know where the tanks are going. Right. You know where the water is. You know where the infantry formations are going. We did not have enough capacity to do any deception ops with water, and it was a goal of ours that we never attained.
Yeah.
CDS. All great. I think we certainly revealed CDS is a division level function that a brigade can't own in and of itself. I'm glad we learned that lesson the hard way. I won't make a second mistake, and I would encourage anybody else to lean hard on a division and a sustainment brigade to help you with that. Right? Don't try to take it on at the BSB. LSB.
You guys learned a hard lesson about CDS as far as the success rate of what you plan for and what actually gets in based off of aircraft malfunctions and not having the proper supplies to build CDS and then running out of green light on austere drop zones. So that definitely threw a wrench in your plans.
Right. And by the way, we're absent the luxury of a DSM tool for the brigade commander that says we're not going to launch until I have such and such on the ground. Launch has already happened.
Right.
Decision's already been made. They're already in the air. Like you're going to arrive and then find out what's there and what's how well those water cans survive being dropped.
Yeah.
Right. And to the extent that a lot of them ended up dropped and ended up empty, I'm sure some folks are going to claim that they were full and ended up empty, no fault of their own. I'm sure there's a mixed bag there. But I think, to your point, this isn't going to be one of the things we can do with our own stuff. We're going to have to look at places on the ground. Our original target was airfields for tanks, for fuel, and for water. Then it was, all right, I found water towers on the ground. Every city has a water tower that's running gravity-fed water to manage city sort of requirements. Where else can we look? And at some point, we were looking for places we could hide things. Right? Where can I find tools that I didn't bring? Where can I find? I think the nature of being required to forage. Look, I'm really hopeful that that's the next step for JRTC to build those role players into the plan. I think that's a huge thing that you could just entirely miss. And we got, I don't know if we got lucky, but I think we started asking questions a little later than I would have thought. And look, I think it got the brigade asking questions of the division too, right? I think in my conversation with Brigadists too at the outset was like, look, if they know where to look for us, we know where to look for them. They need water too. It's we had an effort at one point to try to provide some data for the large language model that 1st Battalion is using with their drone system to identify enemy vehicles and tag them so that the drones can identify them from a distance. Right. The more data you can provide it, the better it is in testing. We didn't get there with enemy sustainment vehicles. If I could do it over again, I would have pressed harder on that.
Sure.
Right. But if we can find what they're using, we can do the same thing.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I think there's some hard lessons across the brigade. Like, I understand you want to hit all these artillery assets. That's cool. No, excuse me. But I think you would also find that if the power goes out, you don't need to worry about that thing anymore.
Yep.
Right.
So you talked a little bit about hippos being a key asset for your brigade and some of the challenges with, concealing them and dispersing them. Can you talk a little bit about some of the base cluster techniques you guys try to operate with?
Sure. I think so. Temptation is to run way too many, right? We think that we're going to run independent companies. We think that we have enough, leaders in places that they can run this thing on their own. And I would encourage you to see the minimum manning for a cluster is probably something like 120, 130.
Okay.
Right. I think the original infantry company of 4 platoons of 30 or so is kind of the right model, because they're they're reinforcing of one another. Right. Our challenge is every gal you pull from the security perimeter to drive something is another thing, another gap you have to manage, right? And the LSB, BSB is not weaponeered the way it used to be. I commanded in when Easy Company was the FSC, 1st Battalion, 502nd. Mm-hmm. So same brigade a handful of years ago. I had more or less the same guns as a heavy weapons company, less the tow missiles. Right, we had significantly greater capacity than we do now. We also were staffed at 130 people, at 131 men in that company at that time. So, acknowledging that the entire army is shrinking, right, and that the size of each of these companies is shrinking, we have to think through what we're asking them to do, and the limit of nodes, clusters, whatever it is the limit of field grade officers. And I think the right answer for the Army is that the BSBS-3 is a major's billet, given 7 companies to manage and several more if you consider the brigades rear enablers. I think that's the right future grade plate. But until that time, the SPO and the XO and the BSB commander have to be in 3 different places. We don't want to ever be in the same ground at the same time. I did not do a great job at enforcing that. Yeah. Mostly because we found that we were struggling to communicate with each other. Yep. And the ITN that we were fielded is great. I think the message back to the Army is whatever you think we need, it's 1.5 or maybe 2 times that number, because I have to outfit enabler units that don't have it, component 2 or 3 or otherwise. We had attachments from within the division that also didn't have it. And we could not cross level to get our way out of that problem. We struggled with having been fielded a whole lot of things and not invested on the front side with the amount of training to manage it in the dark with your nods on your face. And so, we'll talk at the end, I guess, about recommendations. And I would tell LSP commanders to run their comics personally, bumper by bumper, system by system, do it yourself, be there to watch folks do it, and have a published checklist standard so that everybody understands what's going on. I think the number of leaders who can manage the new radios in the dark is very low. And we end up in an information, you called it the information desk, right? Anytime something doesn't work, you immediately, somebody yells medic, yep. Right? But in this case, it's S6, right? We just yell S6.
S6 help desk.
My computer doesn't, what do I do, right? And so we just press buttons until something happens, right? That doesn't work anymore. I don't know that there is enough data capacity either. The voice capacity we have is too small. Okay. We know that. No, we were struggling to talk 2 to 3 kilometers away, a distance that FM would easily cover. We struggled with getting MUOS to run correctly at a basic 10 level, 20 level training level. So that's on me. Right. That's company commander business and something I would have inspected. I elected to focus on the L2A2 functions, and I inspected those things first, and just ran out of time, or prioritize other things, right? By another phrase. Star Shield isn't going to solve everybody's problems, and if we put all our eggs in that basket, I think we're asking for problems, right? We got to have more than one. You got to man every node that way, and you've got to be able to get it significantly further away than you can right now, hundreds of meters away. Because of the size of the target we are, right? And I think the first thing we'll do as we go forward is to figure out what the maximum length of cable is that we can still get a fair signal, and understand that satellite is constantly searching. And so at the edges, there are periods where it doesn't have a signal and you're going to drop things. And we had periods of time where the entire staff would look up and say, is anybody still online? And the answer is no, right? So we did not have a great drill for what to do when we momentarily lost connection on a regular basis. And we spent a lot of time hopping that satellite dish around trying to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah.
And if I could do it differently, I would have found a way to camouflage it in an open area 500 yards away from where we were living. But we didn't get there. I think we moved it a dozen times in one day, and it wasn't like it was cloudy.
Yeah.
Right. So better hidden, sure, but you trade clear comms for concealment.
Yeah, absolutely. Some unique challenges, right, with the work rest cycle, like you're talking about. I joke, a mechanic has a day job, right? It's repairing vehicles and weapons and things like that, but security is also a priority. So these additional base clusters you have out there, how do you work that in what would be a prolonged operation?
Yeah, we got to be serious about triaging maintenance the same way we do triaging casualties. I think if we think seriously that we're going to do engine transmission work in this sort of environment, I think we're probably not being honest with ourselves.
Right.
It's probably BDAR at the FSC maintenance and the BSB maintenance are probably not that different.
Yeah.
To the extent that we massed recoveries to get to set the conditions for the next phase of the operation, I have one wrecker operator at 27 recoveries already, and she's fantastic,
Yeah.
right? But let's call it what it is, right? We don't have the full burden of the ISV to manage yet.
Right.
We don't. That's those man hours are almost entirely hidden from us. And so the message I've been saying to the battalion has been, we are going to track man hours like we were supposed to all this time, and just have not, and help us hand back to the Army the things we're not going to use and keep the things that are. I don't think it's likely that mechanics spend as many hours doing maintenance as they like, and it's especially true in specialty shops.
Right.
And I think the conversation we're having now after yesterday's AR is like, what are we bringing with us at the outset on the GAC? When we first get in, what are we bringing, what are we leaving? And I think there's a significant amount of discomfort across the brigade about leaving things behind with another divisional unit.
Yeah.
Right. I think there's a conversation we have with all sustainment brigades everywhere about what they're going to hang on to
Right.
for the BSBs until the forward call arrives, and what conditions are those. We were trying like crazy to get mobile fabrication into the fight, and we could do it at the outset of the L2A2. Once we got into a field environment, it wasn't just a question of whether we had level ground.
Right.
It was a question of whether or not you were likely to be in the same place long enough that you could end up packing it up quickly.
Right.
Right. We've tested it. We think it's 3 hours to set up.
Sure.
Right. And the enemy threat picture we had just didn't warrant us 8 consecutive hours of leaving that thing in place.
Yeah.
But huge wins, right? I mean, that company, that group, we now call it Strike Works.
Okay.
WERX, right? Matches kind of the Eagle Works model that we have in the 101st. They got a pair of Carl Gustavs back into the fight within a day of the first report. They built that CAD file on their own, and then they iterated on that CAD model until they got the print where they wanted it. And I was able to hand handles to a battalion XO on the manifest line and say, here you go, let's go get them.
That's awesome.
And huge win, and we're going to invest heavily in that system. I just don't know at what speed and at what volume we can really get in production. But
Yeah. Bruce, any thoughts on that, or base clusters with your rotation here a couple months ago?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why diversity of thought in our Army is so awesome, and probably why 490 and 40 are not as prescriptive when it comes to BSA base clusters. Because for me, it's not a question can we, it's a question how we, because we absolutely have to. And I think the battlefield geometry these days has changed, right? It's with LISCO, the BSA 30 kilometers back, that's great against enemy artillery systems that can range 17 to 24 kilometers. But we got to be worried about that standoff attack aviation that's now launching, rockets or Hellfires, at the BSA. We got to worry about swarm drones that are trying to find one hippo, and here comes 500 drones to drop whatever ordnance they can on us. And then what I'm really worried about, and what we learned watching the Ukraine-Russian war, is if you can identify what you think is the BSA, here comes those 120-kilometer annihilation rockets, and then the entire grid square is gone. And if they've properly targeted the BSA, the whole BSA is gone. So I'm a big believer. When I was here as a battalion commander, we fought 6 clusters, so divided the Alpha Company into 3 clusters with the main and then 2 distro platoons, if you will. And then the Bravo was in its own, HHC was in its own, and SECO was in its own. So the pros of that is you're reducing your signature, you're surviving to support. The whole goal is make the BSA look like an FSC, and the whole goal of the FSCs is just to look like a distro platoon or something, just so you're not targeted. Because if they do find you, they're going to target you. More mobile, everybody knows who's been in logistics for a minute. Moving a BSA can sometimes take 12, 24 hours.
Yeah.
But if you tell an Alpha Company cluster, one of the smaller platoon ones, they can be gone in 10 minutes because it's one gun truck. To your point, where we have limited security, it's also a blessing in which we can move very quickly, so highly mobile. And then we designed those 2 Alpha Company clusters, not the main one with the ATHP and the SSA, but the other 2 in which we just dispersed all our liquid log assets, put an FLA and a wrecker in each as well. That's a ready-made flea we could throw out the door in less than 20 minutes. So we saw a lot of, especially during the attack, planning on throwing one down the northern corridor, one down the southern corridor. Brigade commander said, yep, that's what I want, and they were ready to go in 10 minutes. So those are the pros behind it. But and everything you highlight, the negatives, comms. Comms is going to be your biggest issue. So what's your pace, what's your reporting, and now are you reporting too much in which you're giving up your location? So we're being disciplined with our radio checks. And I think what a lot of junior leaders don't understand is the E in any pace plan, and you learn this, should be runner, get your happy little butt in the truck and come find me. It's a responsibility of the lower headquarters to reestablish comms. If that means runner, then you're doing it. So the comms is a huge piece. We ran into customer support. So unlike our rifle platoons, who in their clusters are customer-oriented in the ability to kill anything in front of them, our clusters have to be customer-oriented in the ability to receive FSCs and receive CSSBs. So when they're unsure as to which cluster to go to, or they're dumping in the big open field and now we're giving up where our cluster is anyway, then we're defeating the whole purpose and creating even more friction that we've already built into our plan to try to be survivable, and now we're just erasing all the gains that were brought by that. And then the last piece, and you guys are sort of hitting on the culture. Like if you're going to be in smaller formations, everyone's going to have to pitch in. So that S1, get your happy butt in a foxhole. Dentist, you're not fixing any teeth right now, get your happy butt in a foxhole. Face out. We'll tell you if we have any patients. And that, you see that really in this Charlie Med company. A lot of providers don't feel like they need to get in a foxhole, and a lot of times they don't, but a lot of times they do. And when the armor brigade's rolling through and they're about to hit the roll 2, would you rather be in the tent waiting on a patient, or prepared to defend yourself? So I think that's a big part of this.
Yeah. So your point, right? I would have. I wish we could have done that. I just did not get the. I did not get the sense from circulating that we knew what kind of information to pass and who to pass it to, and we struggle with link-ups, right? Sure. We talk about what would I spend more time doing, right? I mean, the simplest things include link-ups, near and far recognition, and who's going where, and what time am I going to be there, and holding ourselves accountable to being on time. We had entire movements where we're waiting on somebody to arrive, and we know they got to come in this way, and they arrive behind us somehow, and we're trying to figure out how that happened and how did you get by us? Right. We got to sort that out. Yeah. I think ITN is part of that, but the other part of it is just rehearsal. Yeah. And being really deliberate about those rehearsals, and then I think
it's more than rehearsals, it's training. And I probably should have prefaced it because I made it sound like it's super easy, but we spent 6 months philosophically speaking about how we were going to do it, plus running LPDs. Then we spent 6 months first. Companies go figure out what your cluster looks like. All right, battalion FTX. We're still all sort of touching, but we're calling them clusters. All right, brigade FTX. We're getting a little bit more uncomfortable spreading out. And then by the time we got to JRTC, in which we could really run this thing with clusters at the opposite ends of Geronimo DZ, it's because we talked about it and trained on it for 12 months. So to your point, you can't just expect clusters go. You actually got to put some time and training behind it.
Yeah, I came in with the mindset that we were going to do it that way, having not trained it with the unit at all, having just arrived, right? But I think the message to the team here was like, that's okay. It doesn't work right now. Figure it out. We can do this. We can figure it out. We're not going to give in and just reaggregate everybody together, right? To the extent that we eventually did, was not a question of can we make this work or can we not. It was a calculated decision based upon the where the enemy threat was, and I think there's some discussion, right? It's that the item on the bottom of the DSM decision you never want to make about reaggregating the VSA. Like what conditions require you to regain control of this thing, if for no other reason than to figure out what your actual combat power really is.
Right.
And we didn't see a big EW presence, at least across the LSB that I'm aware of. That's one of those things that was keeping me awake.
Right.
At the bottom of my DSM, right? How many comm windows am I going to miss before everybody comes back?
Right.
And we tell the brigade commander, so we got to stop, and I need overhead. I need everything you got overhead while we reconstitute, reorganize, and then get back into position. Like nobody wants to have that conversation, right? But the mobile brigade combat team inherently comes with a conversation about when you're not mobile anymore.
Right.
And we're going to have some hard conversations about what that looks like and how we prepare the brigade commander for that decision when it arrives. I don't think it's an if, I think it's a when.
Yeah.
Because the ISV can give us miles and miles of mobility quietly, put guys on, within a terrain feature of an objective, in moments.
Right.
They can do that as often as they like, right? The limit of how much water they carry.
I think you hit it on the head, though, with the maintenance piece and how we reframe maintenance and lists go. It's less about transmissions and engines, and it's more about BDAR. And we had the great opportunity. TACOM Commander Brigadier General Layler was here observing a rotation. Talked about telemaintenance, which I think is critical for an ISV brigade, in which the Class 9 of the contractors that work on that fleet cannot go with you into the fight. As we look at the fielding of ENVGs, in which our mechanics are not trained on them yet. As we look at these new rifles and saws we're about to introduce, it may be a while until our AIT soldiers can work on that. So telemaintenance is huge. I think you hit on it as far as the additive manufacturing, being able to build parts for certain pieces of equipment that we leave in our castle, but we absolutely need them now. And then, just as you mentioned, triaging our equipment. It's less about, let's bring this thing back up to 1020 standard. It's more about, slap a piece of metal across the big hole in the door and get it back into the fight. Right. That's what we need right now. I think you guys did pretty well on that during this rotation.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that.
And recovery is a big piece of that too. You're a female rock star. That's awesome. She got 37 or however many recoveries.
She's determined she can get 35.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
I'll say this: priorities of maintenance are a little wonky right now, right? We're still trying to get our feet underneath us, right? And I think a lot of folks believed in this context it would be recovery first.
Yeah.
And that's not been the case. We've been very, very clear. Self-recovery is the way with the ISV.
And how many tow bars do you have in your brigade?
Yeah.
2.
Yeah. Well, I'm with that. Let's fast forward to when those are fielded, right? The answer still is that infantrymen have to be able to manage that on their own. This is a company trains function that we used to do for them, and they don't have that in their hip pocket anymore. I would say the first priority in the MBCT right now is probably in comms and electronics. And that's a specialty shop that doesn't get a whole lot of love and doesn't get a whole lot of street cred. And it matters now because we have all of this stuff we want to fit in vehicles at 100 amp power system or 200 amp power system. And if folks are not careful, the leaders aren't doing inspections beforehand, they're going to land here and have things melt, catch fire, right? I got to get smaller, I get it smaller. Invariably, as you shrink this thing, the brigade main is 4 high backs, which is great, until you realize how many things they want to run on those 4 high backs, right? And I think it's under-resourced, and it's something we have to talk to the Army about. The fabrication thing is probably second, maybe third, depending on how long this fight is going to go, and how much access we have to the SSA, and what that parts flow looks like. To the extent that I'm concerned that marshaling units at the CSSB level is easy to find for the enemy, we got to be ready to take on more of that ourselves. And it's a big press of mine to grow the catalog and get regular tests of what we can do. Right now we can print in ABS, and we may be able to print in PTFE or one of the other softer plastics. We've got to get to metal.
Yeah.
We've got to get to carbon fiber. We're talking about $250,000 machines. It's not an easy lift to get to. we have to get to that point in order to offset some of the part delays.
Yep.
Right. And I say delays meaning like the entire national supply system did what it was intended to do, and it got from the national to the to the corps to the division, and that truck is destroyed on the way to me. Right. We have to have a better a way to manage that, and I think the future is to grow that team in the allied trades into squad plus.
Yeah.
And it may be one of those things eventually it's its own MOS.
Yeah.
3D printing is not a thing that you just pick up overnight.
Sure.
The guys we're employing to do this are guys who are doing it already, and they love the work.
Yeah.
Right? But the whole Army won't have that luxury. We have to come up with a way to train these folks. When we get back, we're trying to put a whole bunch of these guys through a program at a local college and get some stability out of them as a result of doing that.
Sure.
And I'm excited for it.
I 100% agree with you, and I think this is the way the Army's got to go. I just think we need to be cautious of the flip side of this. You saw this with water purification, in which we're like, yes, we're going to water purify and run the TWIPs 24/7 for a week. We don't realize that's like 9 tricons of chemicals that's got to accompany that TWIP. So when we say we're going to additive manufacture 5,000 drones for the infantry battalions in a week, like, okay, now we're bringing 32 tricons to the fight that we could otherwise just brought them in on a CSSB clip. So great capability. We appetite suppressant for our supportive forces as far as what's realistic or feasible.
Yeah, I think I've been very picky about the lean piece of this and who's got the stopwatch.
Yep.
How long did it take to do? And like, I don't know if your printer is good. My printer is terrible. So it says it's like 50% complete, and it hasn't started yet.
Half the time it won't even start unless you're like exactly on this less than 1% degree.
You got to restart
level.
your computer first before it'll print anything. I have one of those. Yeah. So, but I think the 3D printer has been the same way.
Yeah.
We show 7-hour print jobs. Some of them take 4 hours. Some of them just stop halfway through. Right. I think we're still. It's a fledgling capacity, and it's not going to solve everybody's problem. No question. But I do think that if I could train every mechanic in the Army to weld, I would do it. Just for BDAR purposes, if nothing else, right? If I could do that, I would do it.
Yeah, interesting. So if I can pull it back, one other, I guess, challenge with some of the base clusters is terrain management. Mm-hmm. So if you're operating 6 base clusters, there's PAAs out there, there's CTCPs and FTCPs, which every battalion or BSB commander, when they come to LTP and when they come to the rotation, they want to know, hey, what are units doing out there for CTCPs and FTCPs? Can both of you talk a little bit? Did you have issues with terrain management? And then sort of what TTPs did you see were effective for CTCPs and FTCPs?
Well, I think eventually terrain management is going to be probably the outset of all of the combined arms rehearsals. Mm-hmm. Right? It's like it's like task org in the operation order, right?
Right.
We want to start with situation. Like, hang on, paragraph A, start with A, then go to 1. We didn't do a great job here. Mm-hmm. I think of making firm math-based demands for how big these clusters are going to be. We didn't, right? We didn't, and I think some of that is just ignorance, right? I didn't know, right? And not having been on the ground, how much can you hide, and what does it look like from the air?
Right.
Lima team gave us the overflight capacity, hugely valuable to see what works and what doesn't.
It's crazy, right?
It's crazy for a couple of reasons, right? But one of them is like how many things in the Army are painted tan. Right, and that matters. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, we took it for granted for a long time. Right, you pour a bucket of green paint on the roof of every one of these vehicles before you showed up here, and you might have had a very different.
Or bring a camel nut.
Right.
Truck.
Right, and I think shocking the list of things folks have been using camel nets for a long time, and getting them back is like.
Right.
Now, I think where we're headed, where I hope we're headed, is some kind of IR blocking. Camo net that's able to hide some heat.
Sure.
How to manage terrain with the PAA question, I think, remains a discussion for the artillery community and the sustainment community together. I think they have the same concerns we do about annihilation fires from MLRS, however many hundreds of kilometers away, whatever that distance is, I don't recall. But a grid square at a time goes missing, right? And so. So I think the brigade commander's primary focus on leading with steel is well kept, well heard by the entire unit. Now we know how big biggest spot we need.
Right.
I think we're good with that. I think the breaking ourselves of the institutional identity to just take the airfield has been hard.
Yeah.
We did, right, by refusing to go anywhere near an airfield. I think the brigade is still sort of wrapping their arms around what that looks like.
Yeah.
And to the extent that everything we do is slower now than it would be if you were just to grab an airfield and park it in the middle of the, in the flight line.
Yeah.
I think we're still getting used to the time delay on that as well.
You talked a little bit too about the L2, A2, and sort of what division owns. I think terrain management, that is absolutely a brigade problem, right? Because we're talking about multiple battalions there. So that Brigade 3 knowing exactly where, hey, these are the BSA base clusters, these are where the PAAs are, and then at times prioritizing, hey, sorry, BSB, you're going to have to keep that cluster where it is, but because the priority is to move the PAA or something like that over there.
Well, but it's more diffuse than that, right? It's we have to operate under the assumption we're always being observed.
Yeah.
And so it's not one set of clusters.
Right.
Right. So the guidance I gave when we first occupied was we're going to occupy. We're not going to put anything on the ground. We're going to set the perimeter. We're going to figure out whether we picked a good spot or not. Right. And then priorities of work will grow at a slower pace. And the conversation with the brigade commander was it's going to take us longer to occupy on purpose because I can't get out of any place that's hideable. I can't get out of quickly. I think the hard lesson we learned is that we have more things to drive than we have people to drive them. And the heat added to that, certainly. And I think there's a conversation to be had about what we're going to just abandon and leave behind.
Yeah.
And we did not do a great job with a priority vehicle list. I'm glad you brought that up in the AAR. I mean, huge gap in this thing. Like, the platoon leaders regularly struggle with what they could leave behind. Hey, do you need to carry this dunnage with you, or can you trade this for additional ammunition? Hey, are we still moving class 4? Why are you dragging that around?
Right.
Well, because nobody told me where I could put it. Okay, these are decisions that we want lieutenants to make. And if battlefield circulation gave me anything, it was an inside eyeball into what lieutenants believe they can do on their own. I think there's a delta between what we were allowed to do as lieutenants years and years ago and what they believe they are allowed to do now. Right? It's not a question of what they're allowed; it's a question of what they believe they're allowed.
Right.
CTCP, I think, remains very much a unit question, and the DS relationship here, I think, is between FSCs and maneuver battalions. I think it's one that's going to take some hard discussions. Right. We can't have an entire FSC drawn in so close to the FLOT that we lose one. Right. And DS, right, they can position that unit, right? So there's some training that I owe the brigade on how big this is, how easy it is to find, what it looks like on camera, and what it looks like overhead, and what right looks like. And I'm excited to get after that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you hit all sorts of gold there, Drew. I mean, terrain, 100%. I was jumping my roll 2, and we're all ready to put them in during my rotation, and lo and behold, there's a PAA. So terrain management at the brigade level, I think the brigade engineer is typically what we see, and I think that's probably the proper person to manage that. And I think that ties in nicely with, they're responsible for the critical asset list for the brigade. And we talked about this, which then hopefully translates hippos or fuelers onto the defended asset list that gets some sort of dig priority when the engineers do show up. And I've seen a 978 dug in, and it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen back at Liberty when we actually had the engineer battalion showing us what that looks like.
Right.
Highly survivable if you can get after it. So I think that's the big piece of the train. To your question about the clusters, I think a key consideration for any HHC cluster is, as you saw, as the brigade goes to 3 infantry battalions and a support battalion, that HHC is probably going to be running, whether it's an airborne unit, the Hammerhead, and the arrival airfield of combat power and supplies coming in, or as you quickly found out, the brigade's going to rely on you to run PZ and LZ every time. So think through that. And then to your point about the FTCPs, I think what came out of our AARs, just because it's a command post doesn't mean the trains have to exist there. So great conversation with FSC commanders, like, okay, maybe you put the battalion S4 or your XO, but you have your own base somewhere further back where you can easily touch the field trains, and then also reach out to your company trains if you have to, but you keep the combat trains away from the command post, because the roll one's there, and we had a roll one destroyed during the defense, and we had 2 hippos lost.
Lost an entire
Watt,
FSC.
and we lost entire FSC. So a lot of good conversation. I think it's back to that battlefield geometry. How do we figure out where the CTCP and the FTCPs are there? And you've got a cast of characters between FSC Commander, XO, Battalion S4, and CYC. So I think there's lots of maneuver room to figure out what that best mix is. And the last point, which was your first point, to lead with HE, to lead with steel, it was echoed to me 1,000 rounds of the big bullets per day, which we did the quick math, and it's like 8 LHS systems, which is 130% of Fox's lift capability, and then about 33% of your lift capability. And if we're expecting the CSSB to touch us every 3 days, now they're rolling in with 24 PLS systems of just Class 5, not to mention all the Class 1, 3, and everything else you need. So is that realistic? And if it's an expectation the maneuvers have of us, how are we going to solve that? Either through air delivery or local national assets if we can, or caches, or a number of different things you guys experimented with here. So great points, and a lot of things I don't think we've answered yet, but definitely your formation and my team's thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this about that. I think they've proved they can lead with that much steel.
Yeah.
Right, and so if they'd said we want 1,000 rounds a day, and they only fired 400, right, we would have we'd have a hey, but look, let's cool it, right? Yep. No, but they have proven that they can mass on targets and get observation, right, in the drone capacity that we have now, MFRC and MPCs, all those robotics, all the AI that's sensing for specific items, makes artillery targets easier to find.
Yep.
I get it. If I'm the artilleryman, I'm thinking 1,000 rounds a day is your problem, not mine. Right. So I think there is a conversation to be had about
It's true of all logistics.
no question. Right. I think the conversation we need to have probably starts with going back to PLS.
Yeah.
Right. I think we need to start there, and then we got to think through what Fox really looks like. We call it Freedom. What Freedom Company really looks like, and where we position them. I think the artilleryism is that in the same way that the FA battalion commander is the brigade commander's fist cord, the FSC commander is kind of a log cord, and they all kind of fleet up one command post. And I think you could make the argument that Fox probably needs 2 distribution platoons, not 1.
Yeah.
And there's, to the extent that we didn't separate Alpha Company in parts and pieces, or even 2 separate platoons, right? What we were trying to achieve over time was 2 independent squads, and based upon the enemy voting, and an intricate series of decisions I made that got some hippos destroyed pretty early on. We just we didn't have that. So, but I do think future tense, the right way is we're going to keep the headquarters by itself. Right? There's an effort to combine headquarters and Alpha Company. I'm not convinced that that's the right answer given the PZ requirements that we may have, and the supporting the SPO in one place and the TOC in another place. Right? The headquarters is already going to be stretched pretty thin. Right. They already own the field feeding capacity for the brigade. That's a decision that we wanted to run food services in operation. I don't see diverting them from that. I think we've moved the SSA over to Bravo Company. Right, that was one of the changes, the directed changes. They make sense. I think Bravo Company receives that. Our SSA tech is fantastic. With the link that we have to AFSBN and the Strategic Army, shout out to Tim Givens and the AFSBN. They've been fantastic. No reasonable person could expect to get what we got. Right. But my goal has been to keep Alpha Company focused exclusively on distribution and remove everything else from the conversation that they have to think through. Right, and so the quartermaster and ordnance functions occur in Bravo Company, and distribution functions specifically happen over here. And I did that because I've been trying to get to independently operable platoons. I'm doing that because I need a company commander to travel with one group and a platoon leader to travel with another group. Right. They just don't have the volume of leaders right now that we would have liked. And I'm doing a lot of that. I mean, when you commanded a district company, it was like 180 160.
205.
205. Okay, so I think it was 180.
You had 40 LMTVs. Just
Yeah, I remember those.
our company moved a battalion in a single lift, and an FSC could move a company.
Company in a single lift. Yeah. We don't
Not
have
anymore.
That.
Yeah.
We don't have that anymore.
Yep.
And I think the troop transport decision, right? We lost some lift in order to get LMTVs to do some troop transport. We really didn't test that very well, at least not as a contiguous group. I think it's an ism, right? But I think it matters. In this fight, I'm absolutely going to put replacements in trailers, right? I'm going to get every able-bodied infantryman back to the fight as fast as I can, and that means they're going to ride in a trailer just the same as they're going to ride in a truck. We have another option, kind of in the fab stage, in the prototyping stage, to use containers for this, to build kind of cattle cars and use LHSs for them. But frankly, we don't have enough to do all of the artillery functions they want to do and all the water functions that are required to use those systems for troop transport. I don't know long term whether that's more valuable, whether troop transport is really as valuable as additional haul capacity.
Yeah.
And my instinct from this rotation and the volume of artillery we can mass as a brigade, my instinct is no.
Yeah.
And I think some of that is also that ISVs are significantly mobile, that
Right.
we can move a platoon at a time with relative ease under relative safety.
Right.
Right. And even with some partnered forces, I think we did okay there.
Yeah. So we're talking about leading with HE, which presents its own unique challenges. So can you talk a little bit about Class 5 management and then probably some effective TTPs for your log syncs meetings?
So I think where's Class 5 headed? I think everybody in the SPO is one deep.
Yep.
Like that's the new Army, and I think we need to just get used to that. So if you've got an ammo manager in the Sergeant E5, Sergeant Staff Sergeant E6 level, right, get to it. Right, I think that's going to be more or less normal. Right, the brigade has been out without an ammo tech more than a year. Right, and I think that if we have one inbound, he may get diverted to another brigade. That's the way life is, right? So I think there's some value to having an artilleryman on the ground as maybe the FA battalion's FTCP representative, right? Living with Alpha Company direct, not with the SPO. I think we are going to co-locate SPO and Alpha Company together in the future. I think that's probably more likely we co-locate with Bravo Company, but we'll see where that shakes out. I think it's a question of personalities and what we get out of the next set of training opportunities. I forget the back half of your question.
Log syncs.
Log sync. So we call it sustainment targeting.
Okay.
Right. We got out of this log sync business, right? Like it hasn't taken off like I would have hoped,
Okay.
right? But I've taken on the kind of the artillery mindset, right? Let's talk about conditions. Let's talk about triggers. Let's talk about effects. What are we trying to achieve? And then if we fight through, how are we going to achieve that? We made that change really in name only in between LTP and the beginning of the rotation. So it hasn't got off the ground yet. But the goal of that meeting is to make sure that the right folks are in the room. And so we have a targeting process that is more ad hoc than I thought it was going to be. My goal was to get the sustainment targeting meeting to follow the we call it the log jam, right? Double entendre intended. We intended that to follow the artillery's flash mob, right? Flash mob is their targeting process, right? Made it difficult to get the synchronization that we were hoping for, but I think the rotation certainly proved that battalion XOs have to be in the room personally. We're putting an extraordinary load on battalion S4s as maneuver officers in a lot of cases, first lieutenants, right? And then they don't have any experience fighting through. We're asking them to fight through. Those fours are talking to first sergeants if they're doing the job. Are they aware that that's where they're going to get that information from? We tried to build an identity that log stats would be correct if sergeants major were personally engaged. I think in cases where they were, that was true. And in cases where they were not, the reverse was true.
Yeah.
So the question remains, what's the right frequency for the sustainment targeting meeting? What's the right time horizon for it? Who has to be in the room? How often do we run it? Do I have to be there? I think they're all open-ended questions, and I think the primary reason that we didn't make more progress with it is that I was not there. Right? I mean, my intention was when we started the whole thing that I would be the one to chair it. Brigade XO and Battalion XO, as far as I can tell, have been on board, and so I have to figure out a way in the brigade battle rhythm to spend the right amount of time with those folks and with individual clusters, and getting the right balance of visiting, of doing that battlefield circulation to see what's actually happening, and being in those staff meetings is going to be tricky, but it's it's a challenge we're excited for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bruce, thoughts?
Yeah, I would just throw out, I mean, we need to get back to our fighting products, and that's where I was trying to push this battalion towards. And for all those that don't know, I'm 21st Airborne Division Sustainment Brigade Commander when you come here as well. So I think I'm going to require from moving forward, you brief your brigade concept of support off of your log cop. And I think if we stuck to the log cop and every single log sync, it's, all right, here's every single grid of all my clusters, water point, fuel point, UMCP, AXPs, and roll 2. Here are our priorities, here's our pace, here's our battle rhythm, everybody good? All right, sync matrix is right here. Okay, you're getting this tomorrow, Fox. Golf, you're getting this in 2 days. Wait, no, I don't want it then, I need it the next day. Okay, good, we're changing it. If you can just brief off your log cop and you update your log cop, that's like 90% of the fight. And you can cover your maintenance priorities in there. Similar to the maintenance meeting, if you just stick with your simple priorities and you go over, this is our maintenance cop, this is how you get FSR support, this is what we're seeing as far as pacers down. It's keeping us to a time, it's keeping us on what we actually need to talk about, and it's updating a product that we can turn around, hang it back up in the TOC or in the brigade MCP, and it's keeping us organized. So I think we just need to get back to our fighting products, sync matrices and log cops and maintenance cops, med cops. I mean, do we need to combine, to your point, it's tough to get everybody in the same room at the same time, especially battalion XOs, they're very busy. We just need to do sustainment sync, and it's no longer a log sync, and now we're talking about medical, now we're talking about log, now we're talking about HR. There's a lot of manifesting problems we ran into with the helicopter force. You always see with an airborne force as well. So light infantry is always going to do an air assault. So I think that's a great opportunity to bring the sustainment warfighting function together. Brigade XO can come once a day, I would argue. He's not that busy, and really hammer battalion XOs that don't come. But I mean, we put ourselves in this jam, this log jam, if you will. When we run like 8 sustainment meetings a day, it's like, oh, Christ, they need me to go to all these things. I can't do it. But if we do one, and I tend to like it in the evening because I treat log stat in the morning as sort of your mission analysis. I sort of know what happened in the night before. The POD is when we fight. I have my maintenance meeting in the morning. Now I know what was blown up or damaged, and now I'm informing co-ed dev. I get in the afternoon, sort of know what my sync matrix is going to look like, and we get the afternoon log stats. That's sort of our war game. All right, everything we thought or planned for is sort of ending up true. All right, everybody come together in the sustainment sync or log sync in the evening, 2100. We're slapping the table. Alpha company's in there listening, like getting their trucks ready. S3's in there listening, running out the door to go putting it into an order to whoever. And, we're firing all cylinders in that respect.
Yeah.
I think our battle rhythm actually matches that, and we just we didn't do a great job of making it work.
Yeah.
But we combined the maintenance meeting with material and manufacturing. We put them all in together. That's what 3M is for. I wanted them to have a specific place to talk fabrications, right, and BDAR sort of things, right. And I wanted a place to get after NMCS. Right, we always wanted to talk NMCM. Right, we want to talk about the maintenance deadlines. We're very rarely talking about long lead time parts, or in a lot of cases, right, orders that are not getting filled, canceled. Nobody knows. Nobody's talking about it. We needed some oversight from our SSA tech to help us understand what we were getting and what we're not getting, and then that was our ingress point with the FSBN.
Yeah.
But to your point, we had them backwards at the outset, and we flipped them. The goal for the sustainment target meeting was to be warfighting function agnostic, and get everybody into the one place, have one meeting, and get through it. That was the intent.
Yeah.
Whether we, how long it takes to get there. I'm not going to say whether we do. I'm going to say how long it takes before everybody sees this vision and comes along. I think that remains to be seen.
Yeah.
And I saw a lot of value in the log jam appearing right after the targeting working group and how you're going to bring fires in the fight. I think, and again, I sort of advise you guys, we still got to be holistic in our approach to logistics support or sustainment support to the brigade, but I don't think it's a bad idea in which we know we're going to lead with HE, and it's going to be a Herculean effort to get 1,000 rounds per day into the fight. Potentially, we're going to build Divorti BSBs, and are they properly equipped to deliver these types of rounds? Or now are there CSSB truck companies that are solely focused on ammo? I mean, I think these are a lot of things that we need to start addressing now, and doing things like the log jam. We're going to create that demand signal for either CASCOM or for Big Army. Like, yeah, we got to address this big bullet logistics situation we're in.
Yeah, I mean, my original goal with doing it that way was so that the brigade FIS cord and the brigade log cord could go to the brigade commander directly and say, "Sir, I need you to pull back." Like, you got
CSRs and RSRs.
You got too many things on the worksheet, right? And look, we got to have another conversation, right? Every fire mission isn't successful. How many reattacks are you allowing yourself? I mean, assuming that you can continue to throw down this much ammunition, we got to have a pretty lengthy conversation about howitzer maintenance after a 14-day fight. I think there's probably an unrealistic expectation of how long you can run those guns at that pace.
Yeah.
But I do think that having the right people in the room.
That's a great point from like Mosul deployment, firing HE max distance, you're wearing your guns down pretty quick, and we actually had some big issues that led to a couple catastrophic events in our brigade. So you're definitely right to consider that.
Yeah, I mean, I went to 2nd Divorti, and immediately upon arriving, they spent a quarter of the brigade's budget on maintenance that they had been blowing off by spending triple strack every year. Yeah. And like this comes with a cost in time and money, right? Yeah. I think the goal was that I knew early on that log sync is a meeting nobody wants to go to. Yeah. It lasts too long. The right people are not there. The XOs don't want to be there. They got other things they want to do. Everybody has things that I'd rather be anywhere but here, right? So how do I change the tenor and the culture of the meeting? And the first thing was that I had to go. I had to be there and be a part of it. The second was that we had to be willing to triage the things that mattered first. All right, and so in most cases, I was going to start with Class 5, and then we're going to fight the medical, and then we're going to fight more or less everything else after that. But I think the 7-minute drill, such as it is, right? The intent of the meeting is solid. We just have to get to executing it, and it may be that it happens. It's one of those earlier, later than sort of things.
Sure.
I'm sensitive though that the pace at which the brigade can move tempts us to plan operations at the same pace, and we're not so agile with things already on the move. And the conversation we've been having amongst the commanders to this point has been like, you can't change the plan at this point because the thing that's delivering to you on the original plan is already in motion. Yeah. I want to change the plan. Well, that's very interesting.
We ordered it 96 hours ago. It's showing up tomorrow, so we're not as agile a division, especially as you learn when we're the third priority of effort.
Right. I think that's hugely
multi-brigade attack for a division.
I think that's hugely valuable for units to learn coming here, because especially in 2nd Brigade 101, just out of the L2A2, it's not like an abstractism. The entire division shut down everything else. I mean, they did a warfighter concurrently, sure, but literally every senior leader in the division was focused on L2A2. Everybody was doing L2A2. Yep. The brigade got very accustomed to being the only game in town, and that's not the way it will be.
Right.
Right. So after the L2A2 ends, once they get you in to position, you're going to be third or second or third priority with whomever you join. Right.
An infantry brigade at that point.
Right. So
no matter how you got there,
I think it's valuable. I do think the math behind how manageable it is to do what we're trying to do, I think it remains an open discussion.
Yeah.
And we look as a culture, as a community, we cannot accept junior leaders being allergic to math.
Yeah.
Show me the numbers. Let's talk. Yeah. Let's not talk in abstracts and concept supports with a bunch of words. Show me the math. Yeah. And let's be very deliberate and dominate those details up front so that everybody understands logisticians are going to be in the driver's seat. We're going to be the ones telling maneuver brigade combat teams how far they can go. Yeah. Part of this rotation was nobody knew what the reach was.
Right.
And I think or by the way what the endurance is. And I think 14 days here, I think we're up against them both.
Yeah. So Bruce talked about fighting products a little bit, and you mentioned the MedCop, so I'm going to change gears on you. What sort of surprised you in the medical enterprise here during your rotation? What was more challenging than you thought it might be?
So it's hard to separate. It's hard to separate EHI from the real worldism of EHIs from the rotation itself. I don't like that answer, but it's
Sure.
It merely is.
Right.
If the enemy's targeting your hippos, though, that's part of your real world casualties.
No question. I do think there's a conversation still to be had on the role of the BSB commander as the chief of logistics, chief of sustainment.
Sure.
For the brigade, right? And so what I did when I arrived was realign all of the doctors to keep chief of medicine in Charlie Med. And where does brigade surgeon fit there, and how are they advising the commander on the implementation of a company within my command? I think we got to settle that still. Mostly because med ops is an operation, right? It's probably better suited in the SPO than it is suited in a Brigade S3, and I think we'll pursue that.
Yeah.
I think there's something to be said for who the requirements generator is on behalf of the brigade staff, and I think that remains kind of an open-ended question. What surprised me? It surprised me that the enemy didn't look harder to find Charlie Med.
Okay. Maybe you just did a great job dispersing them in camouflage.
That's what they would tell you. That's what they would tell you. But
Absolutely, what First Sergeant would say.
yeah, that's what she said over and over again. Y'all are my speed bump. But I think I also expected to see more enemy activity against FLAs.
Okay.
Right, wearing the Red Cross or otherwise. Right, we talked about whether we can cover them up or whether we're not.
Yeah.
How we're going to employ crucible weapons within the Charlie Med. I'm very excited to have those weapons. We didn't have a whole lot of ambulances rolled up.
Okay.
Right. Exchange points, I think, interesting idea.
Yeah.
Right. Intersections are great TRPs for the enemy. Right. And so I'm not really excited about that arrangement. I do think we have to be really careful about what we think roll ones are doing.
Yeah.
And where twos and ones meet. I think that remains an open-ended question if it's a push system or a pull system.
Yeah.
And I'm not in a position to make a call on that yet.
Sure.
I think the realism of an infantry battalion as on the attack, right? We had one infantry battalion entirely attrited, right? That includes their roll one, right? If I dive in immediately to throw the roll two at that problem, the brigade doesn't have one,
right?
And so I think what's not obvious after this rotation is what the limiting factor in medicine really is. It might be providers, it might be medics, I don't know yet. And we're going to have to wrap our arms around that. I do think it warrants a specific, separate, significantly more detailed rehearsal than what units are used to.
Yeah.
And mostly because we're traversing boundary lines.
Yep.
And Charlie Meds, and I assume Med Platoons is in the same boat, are not BOI'd the same communications equipment that everybody else is. So how do we plan on doing link-ups?
Yeah.
Right. The skill level, the smallest, lowest level task is how do we want that link up to work where both of you aren't killed immediately?
Right. So you talked about some of the challenges of an LRP. Now talk about it at an AXP where you have casualties. Yeah. You're doing it under night vision goggles. You're potentially taking contact.
So my goal when we came here was probably to advance into too ambitious.
Sure.
Right, and that was to use cache sites. Right, we never put two units on the same ground at the same time. I don't want to be under observation. Right, maybe we're going to come get that, and maybe we're not. Right, our intent was that some of that was going to be left there intentionally and be used as part of a deception operation. We didn't have manpower for that. We had too many heat injuries too early on.
Sure.
Right, not enough vehicles, not enough things to manage. Like we didn't set up good security in one location, and they were under constant IDF threat all the time. I think. In the context of delivering things, that works. In the context of moving people, it doesn't. And so we got to have they're two totally different things. And to the extent that we have, two or more brigade pacing items in the same place at the same time, largely undefended, it won't take long before an enemy under persistent stare knows where you like to meet. Yeah. Right, and and then I do not for a single second believe that any of America's adversaries will follow the Geneva Convention. not even for a minute.
Bruce, thoughts on medical?
Yeah, and we sort of went over this in the AAR. I think it's a horrible thing to say, but as we think of our Role 2s and Role 1s, these are combat power regeneration tools. So you think of Bravo Company putting combat power back into the fight, we need to start thinking about Charlie Company putting combat power into the fight. And it's hard because they're our friends and we know them and we live with them, but at the end of the day, we have to make tough decisions and prioritize and rebuild combat power for the brigade. So that first and foremost, that should be what a Role 2 is focused on, and Role 1, I would say, to another degree, and that's how they should build their training plans, in which we're building our medics to think in that way. The second part, and you sort of touched on it, is our ability to triage. Again, it speaks to my first point, but at the Role 1, why are we going to put him or her in a helicopter or an FLA when they're probably going to pass away in an hour? And that's a tough decision to make, and that's a tough conversation to have with our buddy, but it's an absolutely important decision and execution that we have to make. So how are we treating that? Are we not only evacuation space, but now we're saving critical Class 8 supplies? Give them a little morphine, but other than that, we're not going to use bandages and fluids and blood and everything else when it's just all going to go to waste. So I think that's a tough thing. And to that, commanding a Charlie Company for 2 years and, including a rotation here and watching Charlie Companies come through here now, we just need to change our medic mindset for LISCO. They're going to probably be the most hardly impacted MOS in our Army when it comes to LISCO, because what they're going to see on a daily basis is just going to be a butcher shop, unimaginable horrors, and we're going to have to expect them to keep, you got to keep turning, man or girl, like keep working. And they're the ones making those tough decisions, like go sit on the outside of the tent, please, or sit right here, we'll get with you in a second. So how are we training our medics back at home station to really focus on that? And then the last piece is, this is really for the rifle platoons out there, like rifle platoon sergeants. In Coin, we atrophied way too much in our CASEVAC ability, because it was, well, if I get hit on Route Pluto in this Humvee, I'm going to take the dude or dudette out of that Humvee and put it in the Humvee in front of them. And there's at least 3 Role 3s or caches within 10 minutes driving distance in downtown Baghdad. So it's super easy. We really need to go back to basics as far as aid and litter, what type of equipment we're carrying through the woods. At what point are we ditching gear because to carry that casualty is, critical. And then on top of that, are we triaging in the middle of the woods? Like, I'm sorry, man, here's a rifle and 2 mags, cover our exfil, but again, these are those tough conversations that we got to have. But bottom line, training our rifle platoons. Have you thought about how you're going to get that casualty out of 500 meters deep into the woods, to this little goat trail in which you can actually put them on an ISV? And have we trained to that? Have we rehearsed it? Do we have the proper equipment? And from the POA all the way back to the Role 2, are we thinking about that? I don't think we are yet in a LISCO type of context.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. So talking about medical rehearsals, you hit on it a bit. How detailed are we there? You're talking, moving an injury or a casualty, point of injury 2 kilometers back through complex terrain. Do we have the platoon sergeants and the first sergeants that are actually going to be executing these evacuation of casualties at the rehearsals? And are they providing the common sense that, hey, that's absolutely not going to work, or it is going to work, so we can solve it there at the rehearsal as opposed to on the ground?
So I think we did a reasonably good job at the L2A2 level, right? For what bird gets picked up, and as that bird scratches, where we bring casualties to, right? And I think the real world is reinforced those rehearsals, right? It's a little more abstract here when we're talking about the JRTCism, which I frankly just don't deal in those terms, right? If you do this exactly the way you would do it elsewhere, right, then those things sort themselves out. I have had the conversation with a lot of folks, right, at all levels, right? The 90-pound slide drag you get at the ACFT is great, but hey, none of us weigh 90 pounds in kit. And when I put 300 pounds on a sled and say, all right, drag me from here to here, right, and change directions, right? We don't talk about the old, it takes a squad to move a single casualty sort of arrangement. We don't talk about that, but we have to have that conversation now.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but interesting watching departure airfield. Some squads, instead of having their skid all rolled up and in their backpack ready to jump in the helicopter, they had it broken down with 2 water cans and the machine gun and the spare barrels and all sorts of stuff. So when they got off that helicopter, they were carrying all that stuff properly, and they were ready to go with a medical casualty as well. So I thought that was pretty good, something to maintain across the force. But I'm sorry, keep going.
It's good. The conversation that I've been having with, in my, initial conversations, counseling with doctors has been precisely to remember the difference between patients and clients, right? And you know, the guy that's wounded is absolutely your patient, but your client is the unit, right? And the unit needs you to get these guys back, these guys and gals back into the fight, wherever that is. To your point about the maintenance of humans, I do think units would be easy to undersell. The spiritual and emotional preparation for Let's Go that we're going to put junior leaders through. And those of us who have lived some of these rough days and not at that scale owe them that.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to have that conversation, you know, since the day I arrived, right? It's not about being me, it's about being better than me,
Yeah.
right? Don't be the lieutenant I was, right? Because we all accept that we have to be in a position in our headspace. We would go to the war with the army we got, right? And I think a lot of us struggled with that when we were younger. And I assume that if something happens, today's young people, young leaders, will struggle with the same questions in their minds. To your point about the carnage and desperation that we're talking about here, I don't think anybody can conceive of it. And so we owe these folks the opportunity to wrap their mind around what that is.
Yeah.
I lead that fight with the chaplains, and I do it myself when we're having these conversations about what this really looks like. Yeah. Good.
Awesome. All right, gentlemen, as we wrap up a little bit here, Daniel, I know you took command, 2 months before you came here, so this question might be, what do you want to focus on once you get back to home station? But if you could focus on one training event, either before JRTC or after JRTC, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually 3 months today. How time flies. How time flies. I know where I'd rather be, right? And I tell the unit that all the time, right? Literally no other place I'd rather be. I think leaders, battalion commanders, field grade officers that have deployments, you know, combat time, not deployment time, right? Need to understand the difference between the spectrum of inspections and checks and rehearsals, right? And it starts all the way with you doing that full layout at the battalion level and shaking every water can yourself, right? And you know, that's the full dress with everybody there, which is less and less practical nowadays, all the way down to the whiteboard conversation. And you have to accept that there is a inversely proportional relationship with understanding, right? As you get to a smaller and smaller number of people, the greater and greater the risk is the people you're talking to don't understand what you're telling them. So you're going to have to do inspections yourself.
Okay.
You're going to have to walk the ground yourself and pick up items and say, okay, is this an inspection or is this a spot check? What are we doing today? What do we want to achieve? And you got to bring lieutenants with you and say, do as I do. We take that for granted, right? They don't know. We talked so much. The pendulum swung so much towards everybody wants to know the why. We stopped talking about the what. We don't. I mean, we have not. I've not seen the resident expertise in first line leader inspections. I'm glad we got the inspections we got, and I contend that they were the correct ones in the correct order, but I didn't get enough of them done. We talked earlier about ComEx, right? If you come down here and find out that your commo doesn't work, you're
too late.
You're months too late.
Yep.
Months too late, right? And because if you're only finding out about it now, it means that the training that you thought you did before you got here didn't occur.
Yeah.
And so I would encourage battalion commanders trying to fight the BSB, LSB to list communications, especially if you're going to play the clusters game. To start with, communications is key task 1. Everything else, like stop, freeze, like until we get this right, we cannot do the next thing we want to do. Yeah. To the extent that there are FSRs on the ground and all of the other things, I would operate under the assumption that none of those people is here, and you've got to arrive ready to go. I think there are significant. I mean, we had this conversation in the AAR, right? There's a disconnect at the company commander level over what some of these radios can physically do. They are wildly misinformed.
Yeah.
Right, and not because they intend to be,
right,
but because somewhere along the line they've been told it does spectrum A and not spectrum B, when in fact it does both. Right? Who would have thought to ask that question? right? And I would tell you I didn't.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's it's worth figuring out. I also think that among the inspections I did was walking the ground in the motor pool with the ESR in my hand, saying, okay, this is obviously not right.
Right.
Why is it not here? This is obviously not right. Why is it not here? And there's a significant mismatch. We want to complain about reporting in our business, right? We don't want to complain about log stats are all jacked up and this is a problem and I don't understand. I can't see the battlefield. And the answer is we do it to ourselves too.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not a deception operation. It's a delusion operation. You're fooling yourself. Right. And I think again, we're back to teaching what.
Yeah.
And what we do or don't do every day builds better or worse company commanders and first sergeants. Right. And so I would encourage you to lay out specific, excruciating inspection of every item, system by system, in its operating capacity before you show up. And one way you might do that is to get the RSOI back briefs lines before you come down here. I think a lot of people discovered, like, oh, you know, I tell you do it beforehand, not so you can fill them out, but so that you can understand the difference between what you have and what actually works.
See yourself better.
Yep.
So I would use that phrase, but I think I'm not satisfied that we get action out of seeing ourselves better. I'm after, is it changing behavior, right? And I got a whole lot of, no, sir, I see it. I'm pretty short on this. Definitely can see it. What are you doing about it? Not a whole lot. Not a whole lot. Not a whole lot. So I think that's worth having the conversation. And I think also for BSB commanders across the Army, they're going to discover that they got first lieutenants at 4 years in, and they got the same guy a year later as a company commander. Right? And so the amount of time between being a lieutenant and being a company commander is very small.
Yeah.
And in our minds, it's significantly different. Right? And we take for granted the 2-for-1 or 3-for-1 learning experience of being downrange in a Mosul or a Baghdad or a Mahmadiyah or whatever.
Yeah. Colonel Hardman has an interesting philosophy on it. When you think back to yourself as a platoon leader, you're thinking back of the day right before you left that platoon when you had everything figured out and you had it all mastered. There's a big gap there. There's a window when you first took over, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the platoon leaders are sort of in that window of still trying to figure things out.
Well, so I will say this about that. I kind of lead with the bad, right? Like I've been pretty early, pretty clear that I was not a great platoon leader, right? Didn't know what I didn't know and wasn't listening terribly hard to people telling me, right? I acknowledge that in advance.
Still don't. Just kidding.
Well played. Set that one up for you. I think the experience gap is one we would easily overlook.
Yeah.
And it's not negligence, it's ignorance.
Right.
Right, and we have to decide how we're going to solve that, and everybody's going to grow at a different rate.
Yep. And
I would encourage folks to set high standards, because nobody gets better at a unit with low ones.
Yeah.
The immediate challenge, right, as you go out the door, is what happens with the most experienced lieutenants, right? And so, if you're on a reassignment cycle rotation, right, if you're coming in January, February, winter reassignment, or you're coming here in the summertime, summer reassignment, I would just encourage battalion commanders to take a really careful look at talent management before arriving. I definitely was surprised by how many first lieutenants hit that window, right as we were on the way here.
Yeah.
And I wasn't paying attention, quite frankly. So.
Yeah. Bruce, as former Gator 6, thoughts?
Yeah. So I'd sort of tackle it at echelon. So going back to the introduction, as a platoon leader here, first battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Brian Winsky, would end up taking over the division, 101st at one point. But it was the night of the attack, fight night, if you will, and the entire brigade's combat power had been drained, and I'm little old maintenance platoon leader, and it's like, Lieutenant Roett, suit up, you're going into the fight. And I was like, holy crap. So I lined up my trucks as if we were a combat platoon and started rolling out, and then they called index or tack free, so we never got to the fight. But from that point on, And he even put in my first OER, like, a warrior leader is ingrained in my mind. And this is straight to the chief's priority, that we got to be war fighters. So platoon leaders, platoon sergeants, you got to be able to war fight. So are you training your formations when you're stopped at herringbone? Are you throwing a net over your truck? When you get to your cluster patrol base BSA, are you digging a fighting position to standard? Do your soldiers know how to apply face paint? Can they defend themselves? Do they know? Can they put their weapon into operation without NCO supervision? Reduce stoppage, functions check, re-attack that enemy. So for our platoon leaders and platoon sergeants, you got to be war fighters, because if the battalion command team's worried about trying to enforce war fighting down at the platoon level, 10 level, we're already behind the curve. So we got to enforce that. So I really encourage you at that level. Yep. As a commander coming here, I took command on a Friday, again, of an air assault distribution company, and then deployed here on a Wednesday. So as you might expect, we, as an air assault alpha company, left all our sling legs in the rear. Had a $40,000 FedEx bill to get it all out here. So I would tell company commanders and first sergeants, especially in the logistics community, if you're a one-off company in that brigade, you got to be able to do all the things that you say you can do. So similar to what Dan was talking about in the RSI back briefs of all your equipment, are we bringing all our chemical alarms? Are we bringing all our masks? Are we bringing all our M26, pressure washers? Are we bringing all our sling sets and equipment? Are we bringing as many, sandbags and, tripods and weapons and everything we say we need to bring? Our NVGs, you'd be surprised how many units come down here and don't bring their NVGs for whatever reason. But at the company commander, first sergeant level, those mass formations, not just your packing list per soldier, but what is our company packing list, and laying out every single piece of equipment and ensuring it's getting in that Tricon or however you're going to bring it down here, because that's critical. Your company's got to be able to do what it says it's supposed to do. And then as a SPO coming down here, two big pieces for that: priorities. You got to know what your priorities are. You got to the chief of sustainment for your brigade, understand how your boss likes to fight. So for me, it was a Colonel Pat Work. We're in the defense. I thought I was going to fly the Apaches for this amount of time, and then he said, no, we're going to double that. And then it's a conversation. Well, yes, but we're probably going to go black on fuel for all ground equipment tomorrow. But yeah, roger that, sir. We'll fly the Apaches all night long, which we did. And when he showed up to the BSA the next day looking for fuel for his Humvee and yelled at me because we didn't have any, I had to remind him that, priorities, sir. Yep. And he obviously knew that. He was just giving me a hard time. But having those tough conversations, whether it's the big bullets where we can't bring in 1,000 a day, or fuel, and we're back to controlled supply rates, not just for class 5, but for all our classes of supply, I think that's a critical conversation. Then I probably told you guys this probably 10 times. I'm a broken record, but my seminal moment as a SPO was in an Expando van at 2100 under red light with 30 of my closest and smelliest friends, going over that log cop, going over that log sink. This is what's going out tomorrow. G, you good? Good. This is what's going out tomorrow. H, you good? No? Okay, you need the next day? Good. 8 codes, you hear that? You can wait on that, or, you got to speed that up. 3, go publish the order. Commodity shops, anything we're missing. Maintenance, what are we missing? I think that's the min standard as a SPO. You got to fight off your fighting products, and you got to hold these meetings to standard, and we talked all about that here. Which is super important. And finally, as a battalion commander coming down here, this is, and for sergeants major, this is the first opportunity that you are the guy or gal and can do stuff that you were never able to do before because someone was already telling you, you can't do that. So obviously have the conversation with brigade commander. But for me, I wanted to try clusters, and I proved it to my boss, Colonel Taylor, who's my brigade commander, who's the next COG, that I think we can do this. Give me 12 months to train it, and we'll be good to go. And he let me fight that way, and I thought we were fairly successful here. I think it was the first time we'd seen clusters in almost 30 years, and we didn't fall flat on our face. And we learned a lot, and something I definitely think is important for logistics formation. So as an example, if you're a battalion commander coming down here, one of the chief's priorities is innovation, and how do we transform to ensure we can meet the threat in LISCO. You're a battalion commander, battalion sergeant major for a reason. You are some of our brightest in the field, so please bring those good ideas. You're finally at a level now where this is absolutely not a place, it's not an experimentation or laboratory, it is a training center, but there's new tactics that you can train with to see if they work or don't work, or where you can identify the swings in your gaff or any type of new TTPs you want to run. So take advantage of finally being that seat of power. Run it by your boss, but come down here and train something new that you haven't before.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. I think this has been phenomenal dialogue. Hopefully this will help some sustainment leaders before they either come down here to a CTC or they punch out the door for some large-scale combat operations. So thank you all very much.
Agreed, Drew. Thanks. This is awesome.
Thanks, Drew.
Awesome. All right, gentlemen.
Thank you for joining us on The Crucible, the JRTC experience.
The Joint Readiness Training Center is the premier Crucible training experience. We prepare units to fight and win in the most complex environments against world-class opposing forces. We are America's leadership laboratory. Again, we'd like to thank our guests for participating. This podcast was created and produced by Mr. John Mabes. Executive producer is Lieutenant Colonel Drew Zabriskie. It was recorded by Captain Jermaine Branch and edited by Mr. Travis Boyle. Series intros were built by Chief Thomas Rich, and vocals were done by Mr. Robert Chopper. Special thanks to Mr. Jeff England and the Fort Johnson Public Affairs Office. Be sure to like and follow us on social media to keep up with the latest warfighting TTPs learned through the crucible that is the Joint Readiness Training Center. Follow us by going to https://linktr.ee/JRTC. We'd like to thank our partners at the Center for Army Lessons Learned of the Combined Arms Center, especially the JRTC Call Observations Detachment. Be sure to follow them on social media as well. Follow them at https://www.army.mil/call. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and review us wherever you listen or watch your podcasts, and be sure to stay tuned for more in the near future. The Crucible, the JRTC experience, is a product of the Joint Readiness Training Center.